Every team has that one off-season that they really wish they could undo.
Who's going to start under center? Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch will equally share starts with the first team, but Vance Joseph said it's an open competition, gang.
Every NFL team has enjoyed their fair share of disastrous off-seasons. It happens. It's not going to go your way every year. But among them is one mistake-filled, regrettable off-season that each of the 32 teams wishes they could take back. And before we get started, big shout out to Nxghtmare Clipz for suggesting this video. Arizona Cardinals, 2003. Arizona believed that Emmitt Smith could carry the offense when they signed him in 2003. Smith was way past his prime by then, however. Also, the Redbirds held back-to-back picks in round 1 of the 03 draft. At 17th overall, they drafted wide receiver Bryant Johnson, who was a big-time bust. With the next pick, they chose linebacker Calvin Pace, but he had his best years with the New York Jets. Atlanta Falcons, 2019. The Falcons should have fired Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff by this point, but they didn't, and it basically set their rebuild back another 3 years. Secondly, they made the very questionable call of using both 2019 first-rounders on offensive linemen, Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry. You'd think that they would at least have one of the best O-lines in the league by now, but no. Baltimore Ravens, 2013. Legendary executive Ozzie Newsome made the curious call to break up the Ravens after their Super Bowl 47 championship season. The Ravens let Hall of Fame safety Ed Reed walk to free agency, Anquan Boldin was traded to San Francisco, Paul Kruger and Donnell Ellerbe also left for greener pastures. Oh, and Joe Flacco was handed a 6-year, $120 million extension that turned into a huge burden over the long run. The Ravens only made it to the playoffs once over the next 5 years. Buffalo Bills, 2012. The Bills apparently thought that they were 2 pass rushers away from contending. So, in 2012, they signed Mario Williams to a 6-year, $100 million deal. And former Patriot Mark Anderson was also added on a 4-year deal. Buffalo could have also added a QB in the stacked 2012 class, but they were too set on Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was cut a year later. Williams had his moments, but never even came close to living up to that deal, and Anderson was released after 1 year. Carolina Panthers, 2010. The Panthers released Jake Delhomme after an injury-riddled and inconsistent year. Muhsin Muhammad, a longtime mainstay at wide receiver, retired. Franchise icon Julius Peppers left for Chicago in free agency. The Panthers then used the number 48 selection on Jimmy Clausen, one of Mel Kiper's favorite prospects. Clausen was a big-time flop and found himself backing up Cam Newton within a year. Chicago Bears, 2017. Giving a backup QB and Mike Glennon $45 million over 3 years was so mind-numbing at the time. And that wasn't even the worst part. The Bears then traded up into the number 2 spot to take Mitch Trubisky. Furthermore, losing star receiver Alshon Jeffrey for absolutely nothing in free agency really stung the Bears. Cincinnati Bengals, 2016. The Bengals were coming off a 5th straight playoff berth, and the front office did next to nothing to improve this roster that was absolutely ready to win now. They ended up losing 2 stud receivers in Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu in free agency. Standout defensive backs Reggie Nelson and Leon Hall also left town. Cincy finished with a 6-9-1 record, their first losing season since 2010. Cleveland Browns, 2014. You could honestly put any Browns offseason from 1999 to 2016 on this list, but I think it's hard to find something worse than the 2014 one. That was one of the most stacked drafts ever. And with a pair of first-rounders that year, the Browns came away with Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel. Both men barely lasted 2 seasons with the Browns. Dallas Cowboys, 2000. Hindsight is 2020. But if Jerry Jones had a time machine, you gotta think he wouldn't have released Deion Sanders. Primetime still had some very good football left in him after all. With Michael Irvin forced to retire because of cervical spinal stenosis, the Cowboys traded for Seahawks star wideout Joey Galloway, which turned out to be a giant mistake. And hiring Dave Campo to serve as the new head coach would set the franchise back for several years. Denver Broncos, 2016. The salary cap meant that the Broncos couldn't keep their entire core from the Super Bowl 50 championship team. Fair, but we still don't know why John Elway settled on Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch as his QB tandem for 2016. The Broncos still had an elite defense and 2 stud wideouts in Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. It was enough for the Broncos to salvage a 9-win season, but one could only imagine what they could have been had Elway replaced Peyton Manning with a half-decent quarterback. Detroit Lions, 2018. Matt Patricia. That's all we have to say. The Lions fired Jim Caldwell despite 3 winning seasons in 4 years. And they replaced him with a guy who ran the team into the ground. Matthew Stafford and Kenny Golladay could have probably been career Lions. You know, if Patricia didn't ruin absolutely everything. Green Bay Packers, 2020. The Packers won 13 games in 2019 and reached the NFC title game. The idea to improve the roster? Do next to nothing in free agency and draft Aaron Rodgers planned understudy in round 1. How has that worked out for them? Houston Texans, 2020. Once Bill O'Brien gave away DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals, that was it for the Texans core. The team imploded, O'Brien got fired, J.J. Watt was released in 2021, and Deshaun Watson had his trade request granted in 2022. Imagine if B.O.B. didn't go on a power trip and actually just kept Hopkins on the Texans. Indianapolis Colts, 1983. This was the year that the Colts drafted John Elway first overall.
Baltimore selects as the first choice in the draft, quarterback John Elway of Stanford.
Despite his warning that he would never play for them. I mean, what more can we really say? Too bad the Colts rushed this trade that sent them to the NFL's gutter for over a decade. Jacksonville Jaguars, 2011. When they moved up to take Blaine Gabbert 10th overall in 2011, that was the start of a dismal decade plus of football in Duval. And to make matters worse, the Jaguars passed on J.J. Watt, who ended up going to Houston with the next pick. Kansas City Chiefs, 2009. After leading the Patriots to an 11-5 record without Tom Brady in 2008, Castle was traded to the Chiefs. KC got 4 inconsistent seasons out of Castle, who went 19-28 as their starter. KC also traded franchise icon Tony Gonzalez to the Atlanta Falcons, even though he had so much good football left in him. And if that wasn't bad enough already, KC used the number 3 pick in the 2009 draft on Tyson Jackson, who had 9 sacks in 5 years with the Chiefs. Las Vegas Raiders, 2005. The Raiders acquired Randy Moss from Minnesota, not knowing that they would get a lackluster version of the future Hall of Famer for 2 years. Worse yet, the Raiders drafted Fabian Washington 23rd overall in 2005. The pick after him? Just some dude named Aaron Rodgers. Los Angeles Chargers, 1998. Man, where else do we go here? The Chargers traded up and snagged generational quarterback Ryan Leaf with the number 2 pick, right after the Colts took Peyton Manning at number 1. Leaf only went on to become, by far, the biggest draft bust in NFL history, and the Chargers didn't recover until Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson breathed new life into the franchise together. Los Angeles Rams, 2012. Easy one here. The Rams hired Jeff Fisher to serve as their new head coach, and they never topped 7 wins in a season during his tenure there. The $50 million deal they handed Cortland Finnegan in free agency was also a giant waste of money. The Rams traded the number 2 pick, which Washington used on RG3, in exchange for a huge package of picks. But they wound up making very poor use of them. At least Sean McVay came along 5 years later. Miami Dolphins, 2006. To keep it short and sweet, the Dolphins passed on signing Drew Brees because they didn't think he'd be able to recover from shoulder surgery. They instead traded for Viking star QB Dante Culpepper. We all know how Brees panned out for New Orleans, and how Culpepper fared in South Beach. Minnesota Vikings, 2005. The Vikings traded superstar Randy Moss to Oakland and essentially replaced him by taking Troy Williamson with the 7th overall pick that they got from the Raiders. Well, that sure didn't work out. Many spent the number 18 pick on Wisconsin defensive end Erasmus James, who lasted just 3 years with the team. New England Patriots, 2020. Hindsight is 2020, but don't you think Bill Belichick should have tried a little harder to keep Tom Brady? Because signing Cam Newton certainly was not the solution. Rob Gronkowski came out of retirement and was given away to Tampa Bay for only a 4th-round pick. So, that disastrous 2020 offseason led to the Patriots finishing 7-9, which marked their first losing season since 2000. New Orleans Saints, 1999. This is all about the failed Ricky Williams trade. Mike Ditka ruined the franchise's long-term outlook by sacrificing significant draft capital for a running back. At least Jim Haslett turned the Saints into a playoff team in 2000 when he replaced the in-over-his-head Ditka. New York Giants, 2018. The Giants' embarrassing four-year run from 2018 to 2021 can be circled back to the 2018 offseason. They hired Dave Gettleman to be the GM, and Pat Shurmur was hired as head coach because of one fluky run as the OC in Mini with Case Keenum. They paid Nate Solder's superstar money, even though he's never been one. They drafted Saquon Barkley second overall when they really needed to find Eli Manning's successor. They gave away Jason Pierre-Paul to Tampa Bay for peanuts. Should we continue? New York Jets, 2019. We won't ramble on about the Adam Gase era because Jets fans have heard enough. But what about the disastrous CJ Mosley and Le'Veon Bell signing? Or the fact that they waited until after the draft to fire GM Mike McCagnon? Philadelphia Eagles, 2011. Remember when Vince Young proclaimed these Eagles to be the dream team after they signed him, Colin Jenkins, Jason Babin, and Nnamdi Asomugha? The new star power was supposed to make Philly a Super Bowl contender. They were coming off a 10-win season and an NFC East title after all. But the so-called dream team finished 8-8, and they had to win their final 4 games just to salvage a 500 record. Pittsburgh Steelers, 2019. Losing Antonio Brown turned out to be a blessing, though the Steelers could have tried to get better value for him. Seeing Le'Veon Bell walk in free agency was also a big-time stinger. Not to mention, the Steelers gave up way too much to move up for linebacker Devin Bush in round 1. And they were way too generous with the 2-year extension given to a past his prime Ben Roethlisberger, whose contract ruined the team's long-term cap situation. Kevin Colbert is one of the best GMs ever, but this was not his finest offseason. San Francisco 49ers, 2015. Jim Harbaugh lost a power struggle to Trent Baalke and was forced out. They also lost Frank Gore, Michael Crabtree, and Mike Iupati in free agency. Justin Smith, Chris Borland, and Patrick Willis all retired. Eldon Smith was released. And, yeah, I think that covers all of it. Moving on. Seattle Seahawks, 2009. Seattle wasted the number 4 pick on linebacker Aaron Curry, one of the biggest draft busts ever. They gave TJ Houshmandzadeh a $40 million deal. He lasted 1 year with the team, and they hired Jim Mora to replace Mike Holmgren as head coach. Spoiler alert, it did not work out. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2014. A year after giving up a first-rounder, the Bucs cut Darrelle Revis and watched him win a Super Bowl with New England. Mind-numbing, we know. They also wasted money on journeyman QB Josh McCown and former Titans star corner Alteron Werner. At least they drafted Mike Evans in round 1, but the Bucs wasted their next 2 picks on Austin Seferian-Jenkins and Charles Sims. Tennessee Titans, 2004. Lost Kearse, Wycheck, and released Eddie George. Tennessee cut star running back Eddie George, even though he was coming off another 1,000-yard season. Kearse left for Philly in free agency, and the Titans couldn't find a replacement for retired tight end Frank Wycheck. It all added up to a 5-11 season, which was the Titans' worst record in 10 years. Washington Commanders, 2000. Well, this was ugly. Coming off a 10-win season, owner Dan Snyder opened up his wallet to bring in 3 elite defensive talents in Deion Sanders, Bruce Smith, and Mark Carrier. Sanders and Carrier each lasted 1 year in DC before retiring. Smith was solid, but not the same game record we saw in Buffalo. Washington ultimately never found their groove and finished a disappointing 8-8. But which do you think was your favorite team's worst offseason? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.